Right, welcome. Live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You, of course, are watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Let's get straight into it. In your headlines at this hour, the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Togo Didiza, says South Africans don't need to panic about food shortages in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Other news, the NICD says another 1,287 new COVID-19 infections. 3 deaths have also been recorded in the country in the latest 24 to 48-hour reporting period. And on the sporting front, Mamelodi Sundowns have qualified to the quarterfinals of the CAF Champions League. Those will look at your headlines. Let's get into some of the stories that we're taking a look in the week ahead. This year marks just over 6 decades since the apartheid regime unleashed its brutality on unarmed South Africans in an incident that rocked the world. For the past 2 years, South Africans have commemorated Human Rights Day virtually, but this year President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to open the Riagile Library in Costa ahead of its main speech on the day. Human Rights Day celebrations will be hosted in Costa in the Northwest Province.
The road to democracy didn't come easy for most South Africans. This year marks exactly 62 years since the Sharpeville massacre. March 21st, 1960 was one of the darkest days in South Africa's history. Fed up with the white supremacist apartheid system, black South Africans took a stand. The apartheid police force did what it was known for, shooting and killing those who stood against the then brutal government. At least 69 people were killed and 180 injured in a peaceful protest march. This massacre left the world in shock, as the apartheid government again demonstrated its brutality. On the day, people were taking a stand for their rights to be recognized.
It is very important for us to first understand the history and the context of this day. It was back in March, on the 21st of March, 1960, that scores of people were mowed down, unarmed, merely protesting against the apartheid pass laws in a township south of Johannesburg, Sharpeville. And this in itself marked a new epoch in the history of the struggle against apartheid. One, the world and international community was made aware of the naked brutality of the apartheid regime.
25 years later, on the 21st of March 1985, the country recorded yet another massacre in the Eastern Cape, the Langa massacre at the then Uitenage. But after years of fighting against apartheid, a democratic South Africa saw the promulgation of a new constitution, complete with a Bill of Rights, the new government's most important task, to give expression to and implement the rights as enshrined in the constitution. 6 decades after the Sharpeville massacre, the country still faces many challenges, inequality and service delivery being amongst them.
When we acquired power in 1994, we imposed on ourselves, i.e. the state, the duty to deliver on all of these things. And therefore, a lot of the brokenness that came historically had actually to be mended by us. We were to give people access to quality health care. In other words, we assumed the obligations of remedying our society. And I often say that unlike other constitutions, ours very pointedly and open-eyed sought to move society from one point to the other.
March 21st has stood as a landmark on South Africa's calendar, and with the annual yearning to remember its fallen heroes, constitutional democracy is also being debated.
There are multiple debates happening, right? There is the debates happening in the law schools.
But there are other debates happening in the villages, in the townships, in the taxi rank and elsewhere. My experience of that debate, it's demanding the implementation of the Constitution. It's demanding houses. It's demanding land. It's demanding textbooks. And that's a demand for the enforcement of the Constitution. It's demanding accountability.
Although COVID-19 has changed the world we know, this year, South Africans can breathe a sigh of relief as gatherings are permitted. Ntlanhla Khatlhane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, on the back of that, for more Human Rights Day, we are now joined by African National Congress veteran Dr. Mavuso Msimang. Very good afternoon to you, Dr. Msimang. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC today.
Good afternoon, Liesl. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We obviously, have to look at the past, perhaps to understand the trajectory of the country. We have to understand where we come from, the sacrifices made, and the lives lost. And, I wonder particularly for the youth, for those who, over the years have lost sight of the importance, the significance, and the relevance of what the day ultimately means for the country at large, and perhaps who don't necessarily live off the liberation rhetoric that has been put forth. I wonder if you could contextualize it for us, the significance to date in South Africa.
Well, it's very important that everybody living today, particularly younger people, become aware of what happened in history. On the 21st of March, 1960, 69 people were mowed down, killed by the police, and many more others injured because at the behest, listening to instructions from Magaliso Robert Sebugwe, leader of the Pan-African Congress, they went to a police station in Sharpeville, Vereeniging, to say they didn't like passes. They were killed. This must be known. And we should reflect on that on this day, lest we forget. It's important because I think personally I'm quite happy that this is expanded to cover human rights. You had a regime that had absolutely no respect for the rights of any other part of society other than the white one. So that model of governance, that philosophy of governing people led to 69 people being killed because they demanded their rights, their human rights. It's important that we keep this in mind, and that when these things recur, as they sometimes do, to our utter amazement and distress, that we focus on the importance provided by the Constitution of ensuring that the rights of every South African are observed. So this day should not pass unnoticed, and for that reason, we should commemorate it. It's a sad day. Too many people died simply because they did not like to be treated differently from other members of the population and be required to carry passes, dumb passes as we used to call them.
Dr. Msimang, let's reflect on where South Africa is today. You speak about the rights of South Africans being upheld. It's also about dignity, ensuring justice ensues as well. And I wonder, with South Africa dubbed as the most unequal society in the world, can South Africans fully enjoy and celebrate the rights and freedoms that came with the end of apartheid? Knowing very well that the grave poverty faced by many South Africans is also a direct effect of some of the inequalities that continue to perpetuate living conditions and lived experiences.
We're talking about a commemoration here and not a celebration. And that's an important distinction. We need to reflect on these things. The inequalities that exist today, which place us in the dubious, unenviable position of being the most unequal country on earth, is a shameful output to. It's shameful. Let's put it like that. It's shameful. 27 years is it after we achieved our liberation we remain almost alone or ahead of any other nation for having an unequal society. This is a consequence of poor economic management of the economy, poor management of the economy by the government in power. It's a shameful act. There are many taxpayers who put into SARS a lot of money. A proper management of the economy, proper prioritization on how these funds should be used would not have left us in this embarrassing situation in which we are. That we still have pit latrines today. The fact that people are still complaining about decent, and it's important, decent housing, that our education system is still quite inferior to other education systems that one is aware of, that you are having the kinds of things that are happening at the hospitals, Helen Joseph, and all of that says that the governments, yes, the government indeed, management of human rights has been sorely deficient. So what do we do, though? It is important that we don't just overlook this. We can't expect people to celebrate this. That is for sure. People cannot celebrate poverty in the midst of plenty, which is what this unequal society means. We really need to knock hard on the doors of government the best way we can and say, unless you deliver on this constitutional right that all citizens have here, really we can't understand why we should retain you as a government. That would be the minimum that people would be expected to do. And unless people shake up, then there are mechanisms of ensuring that those who would be in a position to shake up and honor the Constitution are brought into office. So no doubt about it at all. It's not a time for celebrating the poverty. That, from what I've seen in reading some of the stats, South Africa statistics, is an increase actually in poverty. You have informal settlements. Yes, they could not be in the past because they're not allowed by fiat, but that is very indicative of the problems we're still experiencing, the vast majority of the population.
Dr. Nsimang, I mean, you speak about upholding the Constitution. Perhaps in conclusion, as you've obviously alluded to the issues that continue to plague South African society at large, indecent housing, education, healthcare, whether it's justice or issues of unemployment. Perhaps just backtracking a little bit as well to look at the strides that have been taken. In 2014, the South African government website stated that Human Rights Day provides the country with an opportunity to reflect on the progress that was also made in the promotion and the protection of human rights. And when one looks back, just very briefly, how much progress has been made as we sit here in 2022, as we navigate from here into, in terms of where the country is headed?
Yeah, our anger at the shortcomings of government, and they are manifest, should not blind us to the fact that South Africa today in 2022 is very, very different from South Africa in 1994 or pre-1994. The fact that I can talk like this critically of government is an achievement. The fact that people go and vote a government they believe would assist them is an achievement of post-apartheid. There are free schools, there are free hospitals. All of that is something that we should not overlook. The detail is in the way this thing has been managed. One cannot apologize for mismanagement. We have achieved these rights for everybody, but the manner in which we ensure that these rights are exercised as best you can has been extremely deficient. unemployment levels of this nature are unknown in very many countries of the world. I think at the last count was something like 46.6%, something like that, and even higher for young people emerging into independent livelihood.
All right, Dr. Msimang, I think we are struggling a little bit there with your line. If you can hear me, let's leave the conversation there. I just want to thank you for joining us here. Again, the African National Congress veteran, Dr. Mabuse Msimang, reflecting on the importance of Human Rights Day. This obviously comes ahead of the country commemorating Human Rights Day, which is set to take place tomorrow. Again, thank you very much for your time. Let's take a quick ad break. We continue with more news as we take a look at what we can expect on the week ahead. We'll be right back.
The 21st of March 1960, a day that changed the trajectory of South Africa's liberation struggle. Thousands of men and women braved the night of the then oppressive regime, protesting against the inhumane pass laws. The sacrifices of those who died in the Sharpeville massacre have not been forgotten.
The heroes who protested at Sharpeville on the 21st of March 1960 took up the cause of liberty, freedom, and human rights. They did so not for themselves alone, but for all of us. And that is why they are our heroes and heroines.
As the nation observes Human Rights Day on the 21st of March, SABC News brings you comprehensive coverage on commemorative events across the country. SABC News, independent, impartial.
This year's population count has been extended to the 20th of March 2022.
Government must come count, must know how many people here.
If they count me or they don't count me, I'm fine.
Counting the population helps with the budget. You have to know how many people there are.
And SABC News will continue to track Stats SA as they embark on the population census across the country. SABC News, independent.
Myself, Liesl Wilson. Now, South Africans should brace themselves for an even higher cost of living going forward. It is expected that Statistics South Africa will announce a high inflation rate on the back of increasing oil, fuel and food prices. The Reserve Bank is also expected to announce another interest rate hike on Thursday.
It is widely expected that the Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank will raise the repo rate by 25 basis points. The Reserve Bank will likely note higher inflation projections as a result of the increasing fuel prices on the back of high oil prices. The price of petrol went up by 146 cents a litre this month, and it's expected to increase by a further 2 rands a litre next month. The geopolitical tension between Russia and Ukraine has caused supply pressures leading to higher oil prices. Possible supply shortages of wheat and fertilizer due to the conflict will also likely lead to higher inflation levels. At its January meeting, the Reserve Bank said it expected inflation to average 4.9% this year, but it will likely revise upwards its inflation forecast.
We expect the inflation rate to increase slightly to 5.9% from 5.7%, and the main drivers will be higher fuel prices and surveys of services such as insurance. The outlook for inflation, unfortunately, has changed since the last time due to the surge in global oil prices, and those will result in higher fuel prices. I mean, according to the Central Energy Fund, we're likely to get a petrol price increase of around 2 rand a litre, and diesel increasing by around 3 rand a litre. So those will keep inflation higher for long, and of course food price pressures due to the effects of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So inflation is likely to remain sticky around the 6% level over the next few months, but we still expect it to ease during the second half of the year.
With the high inflation and interest rate hikes by central banks in developed economies, the Reserve Bank will also likely follow suit and increase the repo rate.
South Africa is expected to see its Monetary Policy Committee lift interest rates by 0.25 percentage point on the 24th of this month, and in fact hike interest rates by the same amount at every meeting this year. This follows on from the Reserve Bank in the United States, which hiked its interest rates by 25 basis points last night for the first time in its current interest rate cycle. South Africa, however, began hiking interest rates in November last year. In fact, with South Africa hiking at its March meeting this year, it's likely to be followed by an increase in May as well as in July, and of course in the last two meetings of the year, September and November as well. This is expected to bring South Africa's repo rate significantly higher, but not as high as markets currently forecast.
The increasing interest rates will mean higher borrowing costs. This is bad news for indebted consumers, as installments on their debt will go higher. But for those with investments earning interest, there'll be more rewards. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Right, now the fourth South African Investment Conference will be held on the 24th of March as an in-person event. It's supported by live streaming as well. This as South Africa seeks to showcase investment opportunities available in the country. This year's conference will be held under the theme Unlocking Investment for Growth and Job Creation. And the conference was postponed last year due to a cabinet decision to allow government more time to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and other issues facing the country. Perhaps for more, we are joined by Tsepo Ramodibe, who's the head of corporate affairs at the Industrial Development Corporation. Tsepo, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC today. Let me jump straight into this. How much investment do we expect to be attracting at this year's conference?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you on behalf of the organizing committee. The investment target, remember President Ramaphosa set a target of 1.2 trillion to be invested in, to be attracted to South Africa in the next, over a 5-year period. To date, we've recorded over 750 million or so investments, pledges that have come through, and those have led to concrete projects. So if you look at the 1.2 trillion target and where we are, we're literally 2/3 away. We've covered it's been quite progressive despite the COVID interruptions and other challenges that we faced in the South African market. So the fourth conference aims to build on the momentum from previous years so that by the time we get to the fifth installment next year, we've covered the ground and met the president's target.
All right, so it's up on the back of that. I mean, this year's conference obviously comes at a time when the country seeks to recover from economic challenges exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as high unemployment rates, which also remain a challenge. What are some of the priorities that the conference seeks to address this year?
More than anything, it's to reinforce the importance, the critical ingredients that make South Africa a conducive investment country. Key for us is showcasing, and I think everybody has always understood the sophisticated nature of the South African economy, the various sectors, the traditional sectors like mining, agriculture are there, manufacturing, we've got automotive, but there's critical policy and enabling levers that have been applied to ensure that the energy sector has opened up, services industry. So there's a number of growth opportunities, investment opportunities that we want to showcase to international, but more importantly to our continental partners, the countries, that operate on the continent, where South Africa is positioned as a gateway to tapping into this integrated market that is coming up, as a result of the African free trade. So that for us will be a critical one. But we've seen how COVID has impacted, reduced, labor absorption capacity in the domestic economy. We're seeing an upturn when you look at primary resources from a demand pricing perspective. That's been quite positive. But COVID aggravated, the situation that South Africa was facing. But more importantly, it's really about creating sufficient employment. Investment coming through leads to increased economic activity. That in itself contributes to the ability of the economy to absorb new jobs. And that for us should be the one thing we're aiming for collectively.
Well, you speak about creating conducive environments. South Africa is a gateway to the continent. What is your message to investors, to the investment community rather this year? I mean, what does South Africa ideally have to offer? Why is it an ideal investment destination for both the local and international investors? And I ask this because obviously we look at some of the previous successes from the SAIC as well as the challenges faced. Perhaps as we also look at the geopolitical climate rather than what's happening, with the Ukraine-Russia conflict as we speak.
And true. So we are competing with a number of territories and zones on the planet. But South Africa is uniquely positioned in that we offer a lot of opportunities in new growth frontiers. You look at oil and gas exploration, the upstream, gas industry, green hydrogen that's coming through, but also high-tech industries. So that's the one new, sectors that are quite new, apart from the traditional that have been the mainstay of the South African economy. But we're also supporting industries, high-growth potential industries such as automotive, clothing and textile, chemicals and plastics, renewable energy. If you see, we all understand South Africa's energy deficit, but that in itself creates an opportunity for the international investor to participate in our renewable energy program. But knowing that in itself is the furnace for economic activity and growth. So that's where we're seeing South Africa as, uniquely placed. But when you look at mining, infrastructure, South Africa and the regulations that have been put in place to support infrastructure development, which is critical to economic activity, is already in play. Telecommunications is quite critical to commerce and the operations of industries. So South Africa is uniquely, we've got this varied mix of opportunities that make us a very compelling investment destination for the international investor. But when you look at how South Africa interacts with its regional trading blocks through, SADC, how we're interacting with West Africa, East African economies, but this African free trade market that we're also a signatory to, we're seeing, South Africa as a conduit for investors to tap into, a market of 1.5 billion people, which will have massive returns. But we've got all the ingredients to make South Africa a critical player in all of that. So that's what we're hoping everybody sees and takes away from this year's investment conference.
Well, Tsepo, it certainly seems that the hopes and optimism is high. I'm going to leave the conversation there. I want to thank you as well for joining us here again. Tsepo Ramodibe is the Head of Corporate Affairs at the Industrial Development Corporation, chatting ahead of the 4th South African Investment Conference. As we heard, it's set to take place on the 24th of March, this coming Thursday. Perhaps an in-person event as well as a live streaming event, which makes it hybrid, again showcasing some of the investment opportunities available for the country as it seeks to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and also solidify itself going forward within the global sphere. As always, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, that's where we're going to leave it for you today. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the Week Ahead team, do have a fantastic week. We'll be back next week for a look at the week in review. For myself and the team, until next time, do take care. Goodbye for now.